Cameras bear witness as one symbol of America's financial might burns, only to watch in horror as hijackers send a second deadly message to the United States.
And then, only half an hour later, another target, another city, this time the Pentagon, the military seat of the world's only remaining superpower.
And there was more to come. Plane number 4 goes down in rural Pennsylvania. Dozens of people killed. A nation, an entire world is stunned.
Hello, I'm Jim Clancy.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. First, we want to bring you the latest right now on Tuesday's terrorist attacks in the United States. In New York City, it is 2 a.m. right now. Many lie dead where the World Trade Center lies in ruins. Some people trapped alive have been placing cell phone calls, we are told, quite possibly from the basement of that World Trade Center building. The combined death toll for New York, Washington, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania will be very high, we're told. President Bush saying earlier, thousands of people have been killed. In New York, search and rescue efforts have continued right through the night. Thus far, at least 2,000 victims treated for injuries. It was little more than 17 hours ago now that terrorists hijacked 4 commercial jets, crashing one of the airliners into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center, a financial mecca there for decades. Then, only minutes later, slamming a second plane into the Trade Center South Tower. Obviously an extremely well-coordinated attack. Another jet into a section of Washington's Pentagon building, the military nerve center of the United States, causing a terrible fire there. And finally, the 4th aircraft into Pennsylvania's rural Somerset County. Those 3 attacks leaving behind a nightmare of horrendous proportion here.
The dimension will be very large. In terms of the people we're looking for, it's a couple of hundred firefighters and police officers, which is a staggering number. As far as the number of people in the building, that'll be in the thousands. But there's no way of knowing at this point, and we're going to keep praying and hoping that we save as many people as possible.
And in addition to the carnage, the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington effectively shut down both cities, suspended domestic flights at all U.S. airports. Those flights to be suspended, we're told, until tomorrow, at least around noontime. Jim?
Well, between 100 and 800 people are believed to have lost their lives when another suicide jetliner, if you want to call that, slammed into the Pentagon. 64 people were killed aboard the hijacked Boeing 757 as it plowed into the headquarters of the U.S. Defense Department. 24,000 people work at the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was in his office at the very time of the impact. He briefly was helping out with the rescue operation. CNN national correspondent Bob Franklin will be joining us with more from the Pentagon in just a matter of a few minutes. All right, as we continue to cover the situation, we know that the 100 and 800 people were in the Pentagon. We know also that there were a number of people on board another aircraft that went down. We want to take a look at some of the events as they happened throughout the day, a tick-tock, if you will, of the events as they unfolded. Astonishing, many Americans, astonishing people all around the world as they watched the explosions, as they heard the events unfolding. Bill Hemmer giving us now a look back at the day the U.S. President. All right, we're going to go, I am told now we're going to go to New York. Garrick Utley is standing by there with some thoughts from the middle of the night in the city that never sleeps. Garrick?
Jim, the figures we've been able to report that have been more or less given to us by city officials here in terms of casualties really only concern city employees, firemen and policemen and women. 80 or more policemen and women believed to be missing and probably lost tragically. 300 and perhaps more than 300 members of the New York City Fire Department lost. 300 entire units, the elite rescue teams, number 1, rescue team number 2, rescue team number 4, were in the towers. They're disappeared, they're lost. Tonight, we see some of the first video coming out. The giant searchlights have been brought in, run on generators there in Lower Manhattan, around the area where the towers collapsed. Indeed, the third building collapsed in that neighborhood too earlier this evening. The rescue efforts are underway, but it's going to be a long, long process. And of course, when we look at this, the scene tonight, what we remember and what shocks us and touches us is that here in New York, it was a day that started really so peacefully.
It was such a beautiful morning. The air was clear over Manhattan, the sky a rich blue. The two twin towers stood tall, anchored in bedrock of granite, so secure, so unshakable. And then, we have seen smoke and destruction before, but we've never seen madness like this. Or catastrophe like this.
The whole tower just came down.
It was a morning when words could only begin to express the horror.
It was like a blizzard, but a blizzard that wasn't cold, a blizzard that had no wind. It was just hot.
There was an enormous fireball. There was fire, debris falling to the ground, and then just a whole kind of mushroom of smoke that sort of just billowed up.
We knew that some of what happened this morning, that there could be another attack on the World Trade Center as there was 8 years ago, that terrorists might attack the Pentagon and hijack commercial flights. But how could we imagine that all this could happen? That much of the government would be shut down, the capital of the United States evacuated, and the White House, that the president of the most powerful nation in the world would take evasive action for his own security. Across this nation, from airports closed down to home to workplace, we watched and tried to comprehend what we were seeing. It took time after the shock of the terror to digest the dimension of the human tragedy. We tried to imagine what those caught in the soaring towers, in the doomed planes in the Pentagon went through. Before the end, we can only wonder what happens next. The president vows action.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice.
Retaliation, even revenge, may feel sweet one day, but right now there are only the remnants of terror, the pain of the tragedy, and the tears.
And how do we handle those tears and the trauma tonight for the victims, their families in Washington and here in New York City? Frank Donahue is with the disaster relief units of the American Red Cross. You've been down there today. Tonight, there's the logistics. Housing people, how many?
Tonight we have about 13 shelters. The Greater New York Red Cross has 13 shelters open in Lower Manhattan.
These are for people in buildings in the endangered
that have been
area.
Evacuated, Battery Park, etc., where apartments, just people cannot return to that area tonight at all. It's too dangerous.
And you're feeding about 10,000 meals down there?
Working with the Salvation Army, feeding about 10,000 police and firefighters and disaster workers on the scene tonight.
These are the immediate problems. We've seen the medical problems, the scenes in the hospital, emotional problems, psychological counseling. You get involved in that too.
Absolutely.
Who does it and what do they do?
We have trained, certified volunteers that are certified psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers that are trained by the Red Cross that we have tonight that are working in Lower Manhattan, that are working at our center on Amsterdam, and that are working actually at LAX, at Boston's Logan Airport, at every airport where people were affected by today's disaster.
And what are the patterns? What are the key things these counselors, these therapists really can do?
Immediate assistance to people, to be there when they hear incredible news that someone that they love very much may well be in that rubble that we see behind us, and to be there to provide solace, to kind of provide direction to them, to help them make it through the first couple hours.
This is a psychological, emotional first aid,
absolutely,
if you will.
Absolutely.
What happens after tomorrow, or the day after, or next week with these people?
Red Cross's role is to be there, again, immediately on the scene, to provide that initial, that first aid, if you will. We'll begin to then refer people to their clergy, etc., and other kind of long-term help.
We see again the people in the wheelchair, the people on the gurneys today, and we can only think of those who are still under the rubble. You've been to Bosnia?
Bosnia.
You've been earthquakes in Turkey?
Turkey 2 years ago, the earthquake, and it's the same kind of eerie feeling when I came through the Holland Tunnel today from Philadelphia. And I got down there and listened to that sort of dead silence that you see, and to see relief workers and hundreds of firefighters just waiting to be called in to respond. I saw it in so many places, and now to see it in America, it's pretty shocking.
Shortages. We've heard about blood. Need blood?
Absolutely. 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. Every American could give blood. We never want our country to have a blood shortage again. This is a sign to all of us. We should never have a blood shortage in this nation.
And in a crisis like this situation we're going through tonight and we'll go through tomorrow, what are the other shortages? Not enough doctors, not enough ambulances, what?
Not enough volunteers, people to continue to provide relief. This operation will go on for many, many weeks. The folks in Battery Park and those neighborhoods are going to continue to need assistance. And Red Cross will be there tonight in other parts of New York responding to the regular disasters that you see. And so volunteers, blood, financial resources, all of those things are what Red Cross needs, and so many organizations like the Red Cross need to continue to be there when people need us.
Have we ever had this kind of a disaster, calamity in the United States?
This is monumental.
Even more than the natural ones? The
Absolutely.
floods?
I mean, certainly the hurricanes, the floods, the things that we've seen in this country are devastating, and people are stunned, but this is overwhelming to think that this has been inflicted upon America by who knows who, but that in moments, what you saw in the beginning of the scene of how beautiful and serene New York was, and now look at this tonight.
And it'll be there tomorrow.
Absolutely.
For days to come. Frank Donahue of the Red Cross,
thank you so
very
much, Garrett.
Back to you, Jim Cummings.
All right, Derek Utley, thanks very much for that. Let's move now from New York to the seat of U.S. military defense, the Pentagon. At the Pentagon, the hijacked airliner that hit that building at 9:38 a.m. ignited a huge fire there. Firefighters battled that blaze all day to try to bring it under control. Now rescuers are searching for up to 800 missing people there. CNN's Bob Franken joins us now from the Pentagon with the very latest. Bob?
Colleen, let me put that figure in perspective if I could just a little bit. That is an estimate, a real wide-ranging estimate from one local fire chief who said there could be between 100 and 800 dead. That was just his estimate. Pentagon sources are saying that's probably wildly high, but they have been insistent that they were not going to release any casualties until the people who you see in back of me, the ones who have been watching this blaze throughout the evening, are in fact going to go into the building. You can see aerials that show just the magnitude of the damage that was done here, aerials that were shot by a Washington station, WTTG. You should understand this is a massively huge building, over 17 miles of corridors. About half of them, by the way, will be closed tomorrow because of concerns of structural damage, although officials here say they are insistent. They want to open this building and at least have some of the workers in to make a statement to the world that the U.S. military establishment has taken a hit, but it is not down. And as a matter of fact, already there's some preliminary planning going on for retaliation once the person or the organization or the nation that is going to be deemed responsible is identified. And there was quite a bit of work done in this building today, quite a few public appearances, including one by the ranking Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, John Warner.
We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack.
As I mentioned, the firefighters and the rescue people in the back here are in a holding pattern right now, waiting for the rest of the flames to go out. The plan is at daybreak to start peeling away the section that was hit by the airplane and to go in and see just how really serious the damage was inside. Damage, of course, that we can see is pretty much catastrophic. Colleen?
Bob, do you have any more information about what was in that section of the damaged building? What kind of work went on there?
Well, it was fortunate in a way in that none of the vital offices are located in that section. You had some Army offices here, you had some Navy offices here, but the Military Command Center, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the various secretaries, including, of course, Secretary Rumsfeld, were in other parts of the building. But as I mentioned, about half of the building is going to be closed tomorrow because of a concern not just in the direct area that was hit, but other areas there may have been structural damage which could make it fairly dangerous to be there. Colleen?
Understood. CNN's Bob Franken at the Pentagon. Thanks. Jim?
Colleen, we haven't talked as much about the fourth hijacked plane, United Airlines Flight 93. It crashed south of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. Administration officials saying the presidential retreat at Camp David may have been the target. Now, David Mattingly joins us from the crash site with more on the investigation underway there. David?
Jim, Pennsylvania state troopers tonight have the crash site secured, treating it for the moment as a crime scene. Yesterday afternoon, the FBI clearly taking charge of the investigation. According to people in the area, the plane was flying at a very low altitude when there was a rush of engine noise. At that time, the plane then turned and plunged at a 45-degree angle, crashing into a field which is part of a strip mining operation near the town here of Shanksville. FBI confirms there were 38 passengers and 7 crewmen on board. No survivors. There are only small pieces of debris to be found at the scene. At the crash site, there is an impact crater. It appears as a blackened pit on the edge of a green, grassy field. A key find will be the black box, the flight recorder. There are also reports the FBI is examining a 911 call originating from a passenger on the plane taken by a 911 operator at a neighboring county here in Pennsylvania. They hope, among so many other things, to find out why this hijacked plane failed to reach its target. And as you said earlier, government sources are now saying that senior administration officials told Congress they believe the plane was headed for either the White House, Camp David, or the Capitol building. Authorities here today asked anyone in the area who saw the plane in the air or going down to come forward and contribute to the investigation. As for what's going on right now, things are wrapped up for the evening and the investigation will get underway in the morning. Back to you in Atlanta.
All right, David, as we look at the crash scene there, it's a scene that people don't really understand. You've outlined, they don't really have anyone that eyewitnessed this. I had thought that earlier in the day there had been a report of someone describing what had happened as the plane came down.
Oh yes, there were eyewitnesses, but they're calling for anyone who may have seen the plane in the air to come forward. They have the initial accounts, as we have relayed to you, that the plane appeared to have a rush of engine noise and then veer off and then down, striking the ground at a 45-degree angle. There were policemen at the scene of the crash site saying that it appeared that the plane had come down and the debris had scattered into a wooded area nearby. And again, the pieces of debris are very small. We do have some good news for you tonight, though, with a Pennsylvania connection to this horrible attack. At 7:56 p.m., a man and 2 police officers trapped in the World Trade Center were unable to get through to 911 in New York and call for help. So the man called his sister in the Pittsburgh area, who then called her local 911. They were then able to direct police in New York to their location and to their successful rescue. And to quote one 911 official here, a very positive note to a sad and tragic day.
All right, David Mattingly reporting to us there from Pennsylvania, latest on that investigation. Now, a man who was on board one of the flights that was doomed, that flight that we're talking about in Pennsylvania, called his mother as the aircraft was being hijacked. Mark Bingham had boarded United Airlines Flight 93 in Newark, New Jersey. He called his mother in the San Francisco Bay Area just before the plane crashed near Pittsburgh.
That I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that.
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
I got on the phone, Mark, and he said, hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham. Give me his last name. And he said, I want to let you know that I love you. And I'm flying. I think he said I'm in the air. I'm calling you on the airphone of the airplane.
In his seat.
I presume so. He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, well, who are they, Mark? And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said, I don't know who they are. He became distracted there as if someone was speaking to him, and he said it's something to the effect of, it's true, and then the phone went dead.
All right, and one person on one of the flights, also a man, actually had the presence of mind to phone emergency personnel from his cell phone to report, to say, we are being hijacked. Let's take a look at a night shot right now, the Manhattan skyline as it looks at this moment. Live pictures now of the skyline. You can still see dust and smoke in that area amid the lights of New York, a city that, by all accounts, will never be the same again, not just in terms of its skyline, its landscape, but in terms of the sensibilities of the people who live in it and who live in this country. Financial markets around the world have been reacting to this morning. You can imagine how the attack has unnerved global financial markets that are already fearful of recession. Asia opening today with quite a downturn. Richard Quest is in London with more on that and all the international tenants who are at this World Trade Center as well. Richard, quite a few in that enormous building where some 50,000 people would go to work every day.
Absolutely. There were some 435 tenants from around 26 countries from across the globe. There were offices from just a small suite of offices anywhere in the building to large banks that had several floors with employees. Taking a look at some of the international companies that had offices and had a presence in World Trade Center 1 and 2. There was the British company Thomson Financial, which had offices in the World Trade Center. Morgan Stanley, the largest tenant, had over 22 floors in World Trade Center 1. The company put out a statement late yesterday saying all of the businesses are functioning and will continue to function, but obviously the prayers and sympathies are with their employees. Some 3,500 people worked for Morgan Stanley at World Trade Center. Cantor Index, and a company on both sides of the Atlantic, Cantor Fitzgerald, as it's known, had 5 floors. 800 employees at least were working or had a presence in the World Trade Center. The company putting out its statement saying that over 1,000 employees employed by the two companies in the World Trade Center. The chairman saying, in a difficult, confused situation, we're doing all we can to determine the whereabouts of our colleagues. Keefe Bruyette, a brokerage specialising in banking matters, also there. Empire Blue Cross and Blue Shield, that's the US major insurance corporation. The healthcare insurance was an international corporation that had a presence in the World Trade Center. And Credit Suisse First Boston, the Swiss multinational, one of the largest in the world, banking, investment banking, trading organizations. Not only does it have other offices within Manhattan, but had a large presence in the World Trade Center. And Oppenheimer Funds. These are just a short list, if you like, of some of the major names that had offices, some small suites, others large numbers of floors, like Morgan Stanley in the World Trade Center. Now, joining me on the line is Bob Hormats. Robert Hormats is Vice Chairman of Goldman Sachs International. Their offices are on Broad Street by the New York Stock Exchange, but not that far from the World Trade Center. Bob, thanks for joining us. First of all, let's start with Goldman Sachs, your employees, and what you can tell us about the situation.
Well, we stayed open till about 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon yesterday. Fortunately, we're fairly far away, as you know, from the Trade Center, but our prayers and our thoughts are with our friends and colleagues in other banks and institutions. Wall Street is, as you know, a pretty close-knit unit, and they're competitors, but they're also companies we cooperate with on a day-to-day basis at the same time. So we're obviously very concerned about those people and other firms that are down on Wall Street, and we're in the World Trade Towers.
The size, the scale of what's taken place in terms of Wall Street, in terms of the economy, we can have no idea yet what's likely to be the effect.
No, that's right, and I think it'll take time to sink in. It's a community that, as I say, works together. We know one another. We work on a day-to-day basis with one another, and firms work on a whole lot of projects collectively and trade with one another. And there's all sorts of business going on a day-to-day basis, and it's part of an overall market. They're part of a market, but they're also friends and people we talk to on a day-to-day basis. So the psychological impact is going to be enormous. And the financial impact is going to be enormous. A lot of companies that have been active participants in the market will be hurt, damaged badly.
Let me just interrupt you. We're looking at new pictures now of the rubble from the scene of Lower Manhattan that have just come into CNN. These shots taken a short while ago. Bob, finally, briefly, the financial community has had words from the Federal Reserve, from the U.S. Treasury Secretary. The key now has to be to create confidence, not only that there won't be a cash shortage or a so-called credit crunch, that basically this will not do long-standing damage to the economy.
Yes, I think there are two major things that need to be done. First of all, in the United States itself, the Federal Reserve has to take action to lower interest rates further and do so very aggressively, and I believe it will. And second, from a financial point of view, we have to now realize that some additional fiscal stimulus is going to be required. There'll be more defense spending, perhaps a tax cut. The idea of utilizing the Social Security surplus to retire bonds, the so-called lockbox, is finished. There's going to be a lot more fiscal stimulus to boost the economy and boost confidence. And the developed countries, the G7 particularly, have to work together to restore confidence by showing that they're working together on this. It's not just one country. It's the overall financial world that needs to have confidence restored, and the G7 leaders need to do that together.
Bob Hormats of Goldman Sachs, Vice Chairman of Goldman Sachs, many thanks indeed. Colleen, the pictures from Lower Manhattan, the latest of the rubble from the World Trade Center.
Yeah, and some astonishing pictures, Richard, as we look at these just in. We've seen windows blown out of police cars. We've actually seen cars on top of each other in that area in Lower Manhattan. These pictures just coming into us now of the search and rescue as it goes on tonight, right now as we speak. Jim?
And as you look at those scenes, there are a lot of people that want to see someone arrested, someone brought to justice or made to pay for what happened in the United States this day. But how in the world do you begin a criminal investigation into something like you've seen here? And who do you focus on as a suspect? Our David Insert takes a preliminary look at those issues.
U.S. officials say fugitive Saudi-accused terrorist Osama bin Laden's group is at the top of their list of suspects. There are good indications people with links to bin Laden may have been responsible for this attack, said one, including specific intelligence. In Afghanistan, however, where bin Laden is a guest of the Taliban government, the foreign minister told reporters, quote, "We have tried to assure the United States in any kind of way we can that Osama is not involved in these kinds of activities." One U.S. intelligence official responded angrily, calling that, quote, a lie.
I think we will soon be able to identify who the culprit is, but tonight is not the night.
Intelligence and law enforcement professionals say, though bin Laden is at the top of the list of suspects, involvement of agents of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein or of individuals associated with Palestinian groups or Hezbollah cannot be entirely ruled out yet, especially given the size and complexity of the operation.
We may find that this particular action involved actors from several different sources.
On Capitol Hill, some members said the Central Intelligence Agency needs to do a better job of infiltrating terrorist groups.
This obviously was a failure of a great dimension. We had no specific warning of the United States being attacked, although people have alluded to that before. We've got to do better. We must do better.
At the Central Intelligence Agency, officials point out that no one hears of their successes, only their failures, though they concede bitterness at failing to obtain advance warning of the attacks on New York and Washington. They note CIA Director George Tenet has repeatedly warned the bin Laden group could strike the U.S. at any time. As for how to respond once culprits are found, terrorist experts were relieved to hear the White House say the bombing of Kabul was not U.S. retaliatory missiles, but apparently Afghan rebels.
This is not something that's going to be solved by a salvo of cruise missiles bouncing some rocks in Afghanistan if it turns out to be Osama bin Laden. This will be a war ultimately to bring all of those responsible to justice, whatever form that takes.
It's clear now, as it was on December 7th, 1941, the United States is at war. The question is with whom? In December of 41 we knew. Today we really don't.
They don't know now, but U.S. intelligence officials say they believe they soon will. David Ensor, CNN, Washington.
Now, key to all of this is the fact that Osama bin Laden has been in Afghanistan. Afghan officials, the ruling Taliban there, have said unequivocally that they have been warned by Washington that they will be held responsible if it was determined that Osama bin Laden took actions, did terrorist acts against the United States or its interests. Now, joining us from Kabul for more on this story is Nick Robertson. He's joining us by video phone. Nick, what is the latest from there?
Well, Jim, certainly there is a lot of apprehension within senior Taliban ranks here in Afghanistan, not only in Kabul, but in their spiritual capital, Kandahar, about 300 miles south of here. We also know this morning in Kabul that the United Nations agencies here in Kabul are preparing, very likely to pull out from here. Local staff are being paid their salaries, and there will probably likely be a skeleton staff of UN officials left in the city and in other cities around the country. We also know that some of the smaller non-governmental organizations, aid groups here in the city, are also preparing to pull out. 10 German groups, we are told, will pull out, 4 of them today. Last night, of course, the Taliban moving very swiftly. Foreign Minister Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil talking to journalists saying that they were not responsible, Afghanistan was not responsible, that they condemned terrorism in all its forms, and they said that Osama bin Laden couldn't be responsible for what had happened. Mullah Omar, the spiritual leader of the country, issuing a statement very quickly as well, Jim, indicative of the apprehension that possibly Afghanistan could be a place where retribution might be sought. But certainly Mullah Omar's statement, Osama bin Laden, he said, could not be responsible. This type of terrorism, he said, was too great for one man, Jim.
Still, the feeling persists that there is going to be some kind of retribution by the United States, and we could see the reaction coming there from Taliban officials. How many of them in the government are what you might consider supporters of Osama bin Laden? That is, they agree with him, his philosophy.
Well, the Taliban have given sanctuary to Osama bin Laden, they say, for his war efforts in expelling the 1980s Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, a 10-year occupation. Osama bin Laden came here and fought with the Mujahideen. And for that reason, when Osama bin Laden came to the Taliban in 1996 looking for a safe haven, they felt honor-bound under Afghan culture, they say, to give him a place to stay. Certainly, Osama bin Laden is a figurehead, not only in Afghanistan, but in this part of the world. He is somebody that some young followers of Islam might look towards as a particular type of leader that they behold. Certainly, as the Taliban prosecute their war to gain the control of the last 5% of Afghanistan, a civil war in the north of the country here, having an ally like Osama bin Laden to help rally more troops to their cause. This is a war of attrition, the civil war here, Jim. Many troops die on the front line, frontal assaults, troops driving across open plains being mowed down. The Taliban do need a lot of troops here to fight this war. Osama bin Laden and his supporters would certainly be a good rallying point for Taliban in trying to recruit people to that army. And certainly we have seen this in some instances, Jim.
Nick, there have been reports that Osama bin Laden is calling Muslims from around the world to join his forces in Afghanistan to support the country, even export out of Afghanistan some of the same fundamentalist beliefs that he holds. Do you see evidence of that?
Well, Jim, 2 years ago, we were traveling in the north of Afghanistan in territory held by the Northern Alliance, who are the last opposition holding out against the Taliban. There, we were taken to a jail and shown prisoners they told us were from mostly from Pakistan, one gentleman from Britain, and several others, some from China, some from other countries. These people told us that they had come to learn how to fight in training camps in Afghanistan, and had then gone on to the front lines to fight in the war against the Northern Alliance, and that's why they were captured when the front lines changed. These people have told us other supporters, other fighters, other terrorists, some people might call them, frontline fighters, the Taliban would call them, told us that they'd come to Afghanistan to get training in fighting techniques, in techniques of using explosives, in techniques of using weapons, rocket launchers, machine guns, etc. They'd then taken those skills to the front line for the Taliban, but they said they were also quite capable of taking those skills and exporting them back to their own countries of origin. Certainly the predominance of the people in that jail we found were mostly from Pakistan, and it has been well documented that the Taliban are able to draw ethnically from the Pashtun population in Pakistan a considerable degree of support, and there is a wealth of evidence that would point to the fact that there are many young people that would come from Pakistan to assist the Taliban in their fight in Afghanistan.
All right, our thanks there to Nick Robertson, one of the few correspondents in Afghanistan that is at the moment one of the focal points of attention. Colleen?
All right, Jim, we do want to show you some more fresh pictures that are just coming into CNN now. This is tape, but it's quite fresh from the area in Lower Manhattan around the World Trade Center. Our crew's out there busy tonight giving us a look at the search and rescue efforts which go on. You can see really the utter devastation there, just twisted pieces of metal and rubble. Take a look at that panning up shot. Let's just listen to this for a while. You can see still plenty of steam and smoke in that area. Let's have a listen here. Most of that damage on the ground, of course, caused when the two towers literally disintegrated. They burned and fell to the ground, one after the other, just spewing rubble all over the place. I want to also show you some tape that we just got in a couple of hours here. This is exclusive, a reverse angle of the second plane hitting the tower. Let's look.
That's just a frightening shot.
Officials saying it's the fire that caused the buildings to disintegrate relatively quickly. You can imagine both very large planes carrying a lot of fuel, literally pumping that fuel right into those two towers.
These planes fully loaded with fuel. Yep. Every one of these planes was hijacked. All four of them was bound for a transcontinental flight, meaning they were fully loaded. Bombs, literally, petrol bombs. That were plowed there into the World Trade Center and then also, of course, into the Pentagon.
All right. And also late in the day yesterday, we also saw some naval movements, some movements of naval ships. And CNN's Jean Meserve is in Washington right now. She's got some new information about this. Jean?
That's right, Colleen. We talked earlier today about the movement of forces along the East Coast. Now we have information about the movement of naval assets on the West Coast. They are being moved to protect the West Coast and also Hawaii, according to Navy officials. Let me tell you what's being deployed. An aircraft carrier, 2 guided missile cruisers, 5 guided missile destroyers, 5 guided missile frigates, a rescue and salvage ship, and a fleet oiler. All of those vessels based on the West Coast. Once again, those being deployed along the West Coast and some further out, one presumes, to protect Hawaii. Earlier today, a couple of aircraft carriers left Norfolk, Virginia. They were deployed along with some other ships with the intention of protecting the East Coast. The aircraft carriers in particular, it was hoping could monitor and help control the airspace over both New York and Washington, D.C. And another note, the USS Enterprise, which had been relieved of duty in the Persian Gulf, has now been told it must stay there. So that's the latest on military assets and how they are being put in place early this morning. Also here in Washington, another item. We have seen that the entrances to 3 of Washington's major tourist attractions have been closed to vehicular traffic. The Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, and the Lincoln Memorial have now all been blocked effectively to vehicles. Unclear whether they have also been blocked to pedestrian traffic, since at this hour of the morning there is none for us to monitor. This does not come as a surprise. There is a state of emergency here in the District of Columbia. Much of the city was cordoned off for portions of the day. Certainly around the U.S. Capitol today, blocks and blocks were closed. Vehicles had to divert for blocks to get around that building. So there are a few of the updates from the city itself. Across the river in Virginia at the Pentagon, rescue efforts do continue at this hour. You can see there a live picture of what's going on. Plans are for in the morning to peel away part of the facade of this building and go in and do a thorough search. Arlington County officials have told us that the toll at the Pentagon could go as high as 800. 100 to 800, the range of people missing at the Pentagon. So that is the latest here from Washington. Now back to you in Atlanta.
All right, Jean Meserve, thank you very much. Condolences have been pouring in from around the world tonight. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has expressed his condolences to the American people. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat has also condemned the attacks. For more now on the reaction in the Middle East, we are joined from Jerusalem by Gerald Kessel. Gerald?
Good morning, Colleen. And for Israelis, it's as they watch the horror unfolding in New York and Washington, the equation is horrifyingly simple. Not so much just an attack on America as Israelis perceive it, but somewhat akin to this headline that we have here in the leading Israeli newspaper, which talks of a world in shock, because the way the Israelis see it is that this is a question, a day of reckoning, a day to stand up and be counted on which side anyone is in the battle, as they say, against terrorism, for or against. And there are no neutrals, say Israeli leaders. This is a day in which it should be made plain that there's no place for terrorists to have a haven or to seek a sanctuary.
The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life. I believe that together we can defeat these forces of evil. At this most difficult hour, all Israelis stand as one with the American people. Our hearts are with you, and we are ready to provide any assistance at any time. The government of Israel has declared a day of mourning tomorrow as we bow our heads and share in the sorrow of the American people.
Along with the day of mourning, Israelis have been asked to donate blood, and people have been going to medical relief centers to donate blood, which will be sent along with the emergency rescue squads. The Israelis have a couple of such squads who have specialized in handling incidents such as the collapse of buildings, like as they did when they sent a squad to Nairobi after the bombing of the U.S. embassy there. Israel also taking its own security precautions, the airspace closed to all foreign aircraft or other than those that have Israeli security clearance, the Israeli Air Force on high alert, and other efforts to make sure that security has been tightened. On the Palestinian side, the Palestinians, like leaders throughout the Arab world, have expressed condemnation and have expressed their solidarity with the American people and this in the hour of trial. Here's what Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat had to say to CNN last night.
لقد صدمت وصدم شعبنا الفلسطيني.
The Palestinian people and I were shocked.
وشعرنا بالألم العميق من جراء هذا الحدث الخطير.
We felt a deep pain as a result of this extremely dangerous act.
الذي أصاب عددا من المؤسسات الأمريكية.
Which hurt many American institutions.
وأوقع العديد من الضحايا الأبرياء من أبناء الشعب الأمريكي الصديق.
And caused many casualties among the friendly American people.
الضحايا الأبرياء.
Innocent American victims.
إننا ندين هذا العمل الإجرامي الأليم.
We condemn this criminal, painful act.
ونعرب عن تعاطفنا مع أسر الشهداء الضحايا.
We express our sympathy to the families of the victims.
ولقد أرسلت رسالة لفخامة الرئيس بوش.
I have sent President Bush a message of condolences.
معبرا عن مشاعري ومشاعر الشعب الفلسطيني الأليمة بهذا الحدث المروع.
In which I have expressed my and the Palestinian people's sad feelings in regard of this horrible act.
ووضعت فيها إمكانياتنا المتواضعة تحت تصرفه في هذه المحنة الصعبة.
I also conveyed to His Excellency our readiness to put all of our humble capabilities at his disposal at this time of sorrow.
God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.
And the Palestinian leader also denounced certain scenes that were on display in the streets here in East Jerusalem. A small number of people who were showing their support for that action, those terror actions in the United States. Also in the town of Nablus on the West Bank. Here they were in Jerusalem. There were only a small crowd, but there was a crowd of several thousand in the town of Nablus, where cries of God is great and support for the terror actions against the United States. The distribution by people of candy, a traditional show of a sentiment of support and of delight. That very much a reflection of the anti-U.S. sentiment that has been spreading throughout the Middle East because of the United States' perceived support of Israel in the ongoing year-long now bloody confrontation. And indeed that confrontation has been deepening overnight with some intense fighting around the town of Jenin in the northern part of the West Bank. A number of Palestinians reported killed in that intense fighting.
All right, Gerald Kessel updating us from Jerusalem. Thanks, Jim.
Well, along with the condolences that are pouring in, there are also questions being asked, and one of those questions is how were the hijackers able to board the plane in the first place? We get more on that and the situation with airport security from Charles Feldman.
When TWA Flight 800 exploded after taking off from Kennedy Airport in 1996, U.S. transportation officials were already at work revising domestic aviation security. New screening measures at airports were put into effect. Passengers were required to show picture IDs. All this, even though TWA 800 turned out not to be an act of terrorism. So, how could 4 airliners be hijacked on the very same day? The fact is, terrorism experts say, there is no realistic way to stop terrorists bent on a suicide mission. Terrorism expert Brian Jenkins.
Years ago, I was asked by a congressman, Mr. Jenkins, if I gave you all of the resources that you wanted and all the authority that you needed, could you guarantee that there would not be another hijacking? My answer was, yes, sir, I can. We ground all of the airplanes.
Making matters worse, when various government agencies and news organizations test airport security around the nation, it often comes up short. Published reports from 1999 show that Boston's Logan Airport, from which 2 of the hijacked planes originated, had at least 136 security violations over a 2-year period, this when federal aviation agents tested security there. And just this July, the Transportation Department announced it was seeking almost $100,000 in penalties against American Airlines for having lax security on at least 6 flights checked by special agents. American, which had 2 of its planes hijacked in the attacks, says the proposed fine covered alleged procedural failures involving checked baggage and not failures at security checkpoints. So what happened to all the heightened security?
It's not that the measures are at fault. It is that over a period of time, absent a major threat, there is always the temptation to do business as usual and to forget for a moment that this threat is real, remains real.
But at least for the near future, business will certainly not be as usual.
There will be higher levels of surveillance, more stringent searches. Airport curbside luggage check-in will no longer be allowed. There will be more security officers and random identification checks.
But we are a nation that likes to move fast. We are impatient with long lines and security checkpoints that slow our travel down. So, if history is any lesson, security over time will again get lax. Terrorists can count on it. Charles Feldman, CNN, Los Angeles.
Now, it probably is not difficult to gauge the mood of the American people at a time like this. Gallup pollsters did that Tuesday afternoon, though, making telephone calls that no one ever imagined would be necessary. Joining us now from Princeton, New Jersey, is pollster Frank Newport with more on that. Frank?
Indeed, Jim, this was our poll together with a scientific sample, the immediate reactions of the American public taken Tuesday night, the 11th of September. We've heard the term on a lot of this coverage, war. We ask Americans, do you consider this an act of war or not? Evidence is pretty clear, as you can see here. 86%, almost 9 out of 10 Americans agree that it is an act of war. However, when it comes to military response, we do get a sense of restraint from the American public. We offered 3 possible alternatives for retaliation: immediate strikes against known terrorist operations, even if we don't know exactly who did it. The middle alternative was strike, but only after evidence of exactly who did it, even if that takes months, and no military action at all. Obviously, Americans want military action, but look at this. Significant majority of Americans say wait until it's known exactly who did it, then military action. The reaction emotionally, we've seen in a lot of the coverage, is very, very strong. In fact, we find here that 87%, almost 90% of Americans, including a lot of older Americans who lived through Pearl Harbor, tell us this is the most tragic news event that they have witnessed in their life. Worry about themselves or their family being involved in terrorist activities, that's up. We've tracked that measure, unfortunately, going back to Oklahoma City. It was 42% then in the mid-90s. It had fallen. Just last night, you can see 58% of Americans say they're at least somewhat worried about the possibility of a terrorist attack. Finally, confidence in President Bush to handle the situation is high, very and somewhat confident. We've got almost 8 out of 10 Americans expressing confidence that he will handle the situation. Jim, that's an update on the immediate reaction of the American public. Back to you.
All right, Frank, thank you for that report. Colleen.
All right, Jim, thanks. Well, relief agencies say that they are rushing blood supplies both to New York and Washington, and they say Americans are rolling up their sleeves, quite literally, nationwide to make sure that there is enough blood to treat the wounded. Thelma Gutierrez reports now from Los Angeles.
At the American Red Cross in the heart of Los Angeles, a long line formed outside the door. Dozens waited to come in and donate blood.
I lived in New York for about 12 years, so I really wish that I were there to help more directly. So this is the little I can do.
Inside was a scene staff members say they had never witnessed before. Donors, hundreds of them, lined the corridors, sitting on the floor and any place else they could find space, waiting for their names to be called.
I have never seen this type of turnout. I've been here for 5 years. This turnout is just, it's amazing. It's amazing how when a tragedy like this happens, people are just moved to do something, anything they can to show that they care.
15 Red Cross technicians drew blood while volunteers kept the lines moving. They were overwhelmed by the response. One Red Cross center estimates 250 units of blood was collected on Tuesday, an unprecedented amount in one day. The problem remains in how to transport the supply. According to a spokeswoman, the blood must first be tested. The Red Cross is negotiating with the military to deliver the supply to the East Coast. The wait to give blood at one Southern California center was up to 5 hours, but the staff said no one complained. Thelma Gutierrez, CNN, Los Angeles.
Well, we're going to continue with our coverage of this day of disaster, the attack on America, and we're going to be joined by John Mann and Ralitza Vasileva here to take over for us, Colleen.
That's right. They're moving in, we're moving out. I'm Colleen McEdwards.
And I'm Jim Clancy. As we go, we want to recap here some of the latest pictures that we have in. This is from Lower Manhattan, the scene of the devastation today in what is undoubtedly going to be the worst terror attack in the history of the United States. A terror attack that may change everything, that Americans themselves overwhelmingly see as nothing short of an act of war.
car can turn around.